Hi, I'm Phil Lefanu,
And I'm Stuart Bolus.
and welcome to the Lefanu and Stu podcast. We had a podcast, didn't we, Stu, a couple of years ago, basically about Brexit, wasn't it? It was
3 years. 3 years, I think it was now.
3 years ago.
2017, yeah.
Wow, that time does fly. My word.
Or maybe it was 2016, I'm not even sure, I have to check, but yeah.
I think it was. I can't even remember. I think it might have been like a year after Brexit, where basically Brexit hadn't happened, and Brexit still hasn't happened. But anyway, we move on. I remember was it you came to me maybe about a month or two ago now, and we were wondering whether we could reignite the podcast, but with an emphasis this time perhaps on mental health. A sort of bit of a different vibe to politics. Politics can get quite dry, can't it? But
I think, because I like doing political podcasts, but one, I'm a civil servant now, which I wasn't before, so can't really talk about politics in the same way. And two, everyone and their uncle does a political podcast, and I've always been nice to do something else. And both of us have had our own experiences with mental health, but we had decided to do this before all the current situation broke out with COVID-19. So it's not that this is something we're doing to pass the time. We actually had ideas to do it beforehand, but because of the current situation, it's become the perfect opportunity to do so.
So we kind of we decided we'd start the podcast with because we were talking about mental health. I don't know about you, but I find that when we talk about mental health, when it's on the media and stuff like that, it's sort of overwhelmingly negative. Like just hear about all the sort of shocking statistics about mental health and about how people are kind of suffering and stuff like that. And for me, that's actually kind of part of the problem, that it's always seen as something negative, and we kind of mental health issues are always seen as something very negative. And I think people who suffer from mental health issues, as I have, that actually we often struggle to see the positive. So we thought we'd start each of these podcasts with a positive story, and Stu's got one related to the current situation, haven't you, Stu?
That's right. So a few days ago, there was a really well-read article in The Guardian about how wildlife is returning to Venice, because due to the tragic situation in Italy, Venice is being completely bereft of any tourists, frankly, and there's only people who live there who are still around. And in that time, certain things have happened. One is that, because usually, I don't know if you've ever been to Venice with all the gondolas going up and down the canals, when they do that, they're always stirring up the mud at the bottom of the canal. Because none of the gondolas are going anywhere at the moment, all the mud has settled at the bottom, so the water is now clear, and you can actually see fish swimming up and down the canals. And because you can see the fish, the birds which eat those fish have come back as well. So people are now seeing, birds in the canals diving for the fish, which was quite a rare sight beforehand. And people are saying, that these are things they haven't seen for a long, long time. And there are people in Venice saying that once this is all over, and it will be over at some point, they're going to have a real kind of conversation about trying to have tourism, but also trying to protect the nature of the place as well. Saying that, we don't need all these tourists, and that, there is something natural which we can look after too. And it's not, Venice is not the only place that's going to be happening. It's the most obvious because it is one of the most touristy places in the world. But yeah, in many other places in the world, wildlife is sort of making a comeback. I even think when I go in the park, do the animals even probably realise something's different? Because I'm sure they realise there's a lot less people around.
What's going on in the mind of a London squirrel? I
don't know exactly, but they may find it, okay, I'm not being fed, there's hardly any people to feed me and stuff like that. Or the birds were there's not just, because when I was walking in central London like a week ago before the lockdown was put in place, it's just totally empty. You could hear all the seagulls, and they're probably looking for people to throw the chips on the local McDonald's, and that's all closed, right? So it is a really interesting thing in the sense that is happening globally. It's not like, oh, it's just like a handful of countries. No, it's basically everywhere.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting. Like the whole situation's been sort of completely turned upside down. But like the air, we live on the harbour side in Bristol, and like it's normally one of the busiest roads in Bristol, and the roads, the air is normally pretty chocker with pollution and stuff. It's not great, and the change, mate, like it's just unbelievable. We went out back today, and so you can smell the trees and the soil for the first time since we started living here 3.5 years ago. It's just, I think the society may sort of wake up as a result of this, and realise that actually there's a kind of potential room for improvement about the way we're doing things.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, yeah, air pollution is gone down considerably, and you're right, when this is over, more people will be going out more and travelling more, some people may say, but, the air quality was so good. Obviously, we can't go back to quarantine mode because there are negative things economically of that, but do we have to go back to exactly where we were before? As I said, there is room for improvement. Perhaps we should take this opportunity to study those and see which ones are most feasible.
Right, so we've got the first question of today, or the first topic of discussion today, which is, because we're kicking things off with mental health, I thought we'd talk about what is mental health, or what do we mean by mental health, and I guess this is a fairly sort of subjective issue. I mean, I looked up the origins of the words about 10 minutes ago, actually. The word mental means, it's from the late Middle English, which is from Latin mentalis, which means mind, and the word health means of Old English of Germanic origin, which means whole. So the two words together, in terms of the origin of the word, mean sort of mental wholeness, as it were, sort of feeling whole mentally. And I found that quite interesting, and I think mental health is something that's really sort of come. What would you say, Stu? In the last sort of 10 years, it's really kind of come to the forefront of media.
I would say it's only really been, I would say, in the last few years that it's really kind of taken off, because I remember even a few years ago, an old family friend was just. You remember when the royal family? Well, I say all of them, was more like Prince Harry, Prince William, and Kate. They kind of started talking about it more often, and started hosting. Like, Prince Harry and Prince William talked about how their mental health obviously suffered after their mother passed away, and the struggles they went through with that. And they kind of made it more acceptable to talk about it, because beforehand it was like, people were saying they were suffering mental health issues. It was just seen as because it's like an unseen problem. Someone can just look fine and have it. It was more like, I don't understand it, I don't want to hear about it. And I think recently there has come full circle where people can talk about it. But the reason I was trying to originally say was when those princes did that. I had an old family friend said, it's just this fad, all the young princes are talking about it, blah blah blah. I just think it's all a whole waffle and that kind of stuff. They said, so for the older generation, I think some of them, they grew up in a time where this wasn't talked about, so they find it kind of they're not used to it being talked about. Because they're just not used to it, and it's something they don't particularly feel comfortable with. They think it's all like a bit of a fad. But I mean, we're going to have to talk about it more, because
it's interesting.
It's
like
here for us.
Whether the interpretation of that is that the older generations didn't suffer from it, or whether they did and they didn't talk about it. I suspect
more likely the latter. I'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
The idea that during World War II, everyone just had a stiff upper lip and it was fine. I'm sure some people went through that. I'm sure other people, they just went to pieces. But those don't make heroic and stirring war stories, right? So they don't get talked about. Clearly that stuff happened, especially if you're fighting on the front. I imagine it was horrific. But you only hear the feel good stories, because you don't want to hear about the person who basically lost their mind and was never the same again. That's not something you want to tell young children, is it?
It's interesting that mental health has always been seen as an awkward topic to talk about, because it's not. In a way, it's sort of. there's nothing innately. I mean, I guess if you think about other taboo subjects like sex or something like that, you can kind of see to some extent why it's not talked about. It's quite an intimate act, but mental health is not. You could sort of foresee a society where mental health has always been talked about. I'm not sure if there is any societies around the world where it's always been a part of the tradition to talk about what's going on in your head, but it's not an innately awkward thing, is it, to talk about what's going on in your head? But I guess it's just a sign of weakness to some people.
Yeah, I think there's still there is still a sort of stigma attached to it. It can be seen as quite taboo. I definitely know that in the African community, which I come from myself, mental health issues can be seen as they're kind of deemed as like religious issues, and if you kind of say you have an issue, it's more like seeing, you don't have a close relationship with God, that's why you feel like this, right? And it's not exactly the case. I definitely think that different cultures sometimes have different approaches to it. Some work better than others, and I don't think there is a kind of normal approach. Because, like, for example, if you're just ill, let's say you break your leg, everyone's like, you go to hospital, and they fix it for you, right? Mental health sadly doesn't work like that.
No.
And that's where I think the great problem lies.
I find it interesting, the kind of crossover between how mental health is not. Sort of physical health is very much just a medical issue, whereas if you look at mental health, it's sort of it's medical, but then it's also going on to sort of psychological, and then almost sort of other domains as well. Like sort of religious and spiritual, and it's sort of there's so many different ways to approach the problem, and I think some of them, they all have their merits. Some of them work better than others. I think the idea for me that a doctor who's got a medicine degree would know everything about what the best way of recovering from intricate mental health issues. The idea that they're the only person you can go to, I think, is ludicrous.
Well, I have a friend who I think is struggling with a mental health issue, and they said to me. So I asked them if they tried therapy, and they said they had, but they really didn't like it. And I asked them why, and they said, "Well, I have to detail my problems to an absolute stranger who I feel is basically judging me, even though they're professionals and stuff. I feel like I'm being judged, and because they don't know me at all, they can't bring any nuance to what I'm saying. Because if someone knows me quite well, I have an issue with something, and they can say, okay, well, I've known you for a long time, I know this is how you usually react to things and such, but with a stranger, I just don't have that sort of relationship, and I find it really hard to really open myself up to them. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, isn't it?
A stranger can treat you for an illness, like pneumonia or something, but not for this. I don't think it's the same.
No, I mean, it's interesting that we live in a society where we often can be more vulnerable with a stranger than we are with the people we know best, particularly with regard to disclosing secrets. I mean, I guess we used to, with religions you have confession, which works a little bit like that. But even then, the priest might be a member of the community.
Yeah, and they may talk. You never know.
Yeah. So I mean, I think there definitely seems to be barriers within families about within your intimate social circle about discussing these kind of things, and maybe that has more value than discussing it with a therapist who charges £50 an hour. But at the same time, they're trained in psychological principles, whereas your mum or your son or your brother might not be, probably won't be. I find it interesting that we've got in Western society, we've got all these remedies, these so many different types of therapy and so many different types of medicine. And is mental health better in the Western world where we have these type of things compared to in other areas of the world where they don't have that, but they might have a more intact family unit and more intact community? It's an interesting spectrum, really, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, to round off on that, the answer to what is mental health is that it's clearly not a simple one.
No.
It's just a multitude of things, which is also just very specific to the individual, right? What can be beneficial to your mental health may not do anything for me. Perhaps for you, being in nature and being around friends and family is what's most important for you, but perhaps for someone else, it's having time alone. That's what they need. So that's why I think it's so hard to prescribe a cure for any mental health issues, because it depends on the patient rather than normal medicine, which is just, okay, this is the way it works.
Yeah. And that moves us on to the second topic, which was how it was recognizing mental health issues. Like how do you recognize when there is one, and if is it from that philosophical conundrum? If a leaf falls but no one hears it, does it make a noise? And with the
I think it's a tree, because do leaves make much noise when they fall? But yeah, if a tree falls in the forest but no one hears it, does it make a sound?
If you don't recognise that you've got a mental health issue, do you have a mental health issue? Is it for you to judge or for other people to judge? Certainly for me, I think in recovery from post-traumatic stress disorder, it took me a good year or so to really realise quite how screwed up I'd become. I was kind of oblivious, really. I was so in my own head that everything kind of seemed normal, and then actually it was over time and through the perspective of other people that I realised that things, all was not well. I don't know if you got anything to add on that.
I haven't gone through a situation like that. I should be thankful for that, really, in some ways. But for me, it's more of your friends or family kind of realise it potentially before you do, because they've noticed changes in your behaviour and that your reactions to things are different, and they're the ones who's kind of alert. Is everything all right? And because for me, it was more about when I was living at home and I was just unemployed and I couldn't seem to get a decent job, and I just kind of gave up, and I just said, well, everything I apply for, it doesn't seem to go anywhere, so whatever. I'm just unemployable. And it got to the point when I just saw one of my old friends, and he told me, are you alright? Because also it's like when you're in a situation like that, sometimes you don't realise how much time is passing. It's only a friend who pulled me out of it. Kind of realised, what have you been doing for the last 3 months? And I couldn't even really remember what I'd done. Can you imagine? 3 months of my life I could barely recall, because I was just like, well, I was just an autopilot, essentially.
Yeah.
And it was kind of them who kind of made me realise that, that's not normal. So, yeah, I think very good friends and family are the ones I think recognise it. Because when you're in it, you kind of don't see that things are kind of spiralling out of control, I think.
I definitely feel that. I think I do quite a lot of telephoning friends quite regularly.
I know.
And one of the reasons I do that is because I realise that me, on my own, if I'm just judging my own mental health on my own, I'd come to ridiculous conclusions, and not just my mental health, judging my own life situation. If it's just me on my own, I come to quite irrational conclusions, and it requires someone else's input, like connecting with someone else. And a lot of the time I'll talk about a situation and they'll be like, what on earth's that about? That's ridiculous. And then you think about it, you're like, actually, yeah, you're kind of right, that is ridiculous. I guess there always has to be a reference point, doesn't there? There always has to be something to compare it to. But at the same time, you can't, only you know you as well as you do.
Yeah, that's very true.
Although some people might argue different. Maybe other people, because other people can see things you don't, they can sort of help you out more than you can yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it's having a good support network is the key. Because if you don't have that, mental health issues can basically just totally overwhelm you. So I mean, but it's easier said than done. Have a good support network. I mean, that's not it's not something you can just get.
No.
It's something you build over a period of time. But it's kind of just making sure to always have that, even when your mental health you think is fine, because you may need to fall back on it. So that's something to kind of look out for. Yeah, I think we should move on to our final item, which is coping under COVID-19. I mean, there's no escaping it. We are living through a pandemic. Much of the world is in lockdown, and much of it will be in lockdown in the coming weeks and months. People's lives are taking a drastic change, and may do so for a period of weeks, if not months. And it's going to be a stressful or transformative time for all of us. So, this little segment is about how do we cope during this period. I mean, Phil, you you could say you've already had the virus, so please, how have you found the last few weeks?
I have definitely had the virus. I've had some sort of symptoms.
They've not been tested. Huh?
Yeah, we'll probably never know, to be honest. But I guess, it was interesting. I came back from work on Friday a couple of weeks ago, and then suddenly realised I had a sort of dry cough, and sort of almost all of a sudden felt very, very lethargic, and then realised sort of, within the next 5 minutes that I was going to have to self-isolate for at least 7 days. And sort of it came all of a sudden, because I hadn't planned it. It was sort of suddenly there, and I had all this sort of stuff to do for work the next week that I then didn't have to do, and it was sort of very, I went into an absolute time warp for about a week because I was too ill to really do much work, but at the same time, because I had to stay inside the whole time, I didn't really have a lot to do either, and I think it's a testing time for people with mental health issues, particularly with people that may not have realised that they have underlying mental health issues, and are now suddenly faced with this test of being on their own for weeks, or even alone with your partner or alone with a couple of others are still testing times.
Or alone with your parents. I mean, because a lot of Londoners, I live in London, live at home to save money on rent, because rent's expensive here, if you haven't noticed. Sadiq can't get on that, please. And it's one thing to with your parents, we can go out and do your thing and be with your friends and be and have your weekends to yourself. But when you can't do any of that, that could potentially be a very different sort of dynamic.
I guess to put a sort of positive spin on this podcast, we could. It's probably worth looking at ways that we can, we're in this situation, we can't do anything about it, but there's things that there's different ways to spend our days when we're inside the whole time, and I guess
for me, if I may go first, having a routine is probably a really good way to cope. So I've started, I'm trying to use this period as a time to kind of, it's been like starting uni in a very weird way, but just without all the social aspects of just trying lots of new things. So, like, for example, myself and you, Phil, we're doing this podcast again, which we haven't done for at least 3 years. I'm exercising, using my mandated time outside to just do a run, which I've always been meaning to do. I never get round to it, but now I just got the impetus to go do that. Because I can't go to restaurants, I'm cooking. I do have a funny story about that coming up just at the end of this. Me and my housemate are friends, so I'm lucky in that sense. We do we play some Xbox together, we chat, and we've watched some films together as well. So I've just used the time to be like, because usually, a lot of people can agree, when you work and you come home, you got your commute, however long it is, and you come home and you eat, and then you're exhausted, and you might have an hour before you can do things, and you just go to bed. Well, now I'm like, I clock off from work and boom, I'm home already. So I've got all that extra time. So I'm trying to fill that extra time with all the things I kept saying I would do. I'm going to read that book. I'm going to learn that language. I'm going to write some poetry. I'm going to paint. I'm going to do that podcast. Because I've got nothing stopping me now. I don't have any real distractions at this point. Obviously, I've got children and stuff. It's a bit different. But yeah.
I found it a really. I spent the first couple of days I was in isolation, just kind of meditating a lot of the time. It was actually quite a nice time to actually experience sort of stillness, and it's interesting that it hasn't been all bad, this isolation. Sort of we've been kind of watching movies in the evening, and we're guaranteed not to be interrupted now. There's no one coming in the door. We got quite a social flat normally. We live in the centre of town with people coming and going. It's been guaranteed calmness for 2 weeks. It's been your mind does wander a lot. I find when you're in particularly, there's not a lot of noise about.
Not many cars.
No, but at the same time, it sort of allowed me to kind of actually be at one with myself a little bit more and sort of listen to sort of the rhythm of my own body and the rhythm of what's actually going on in my head. And it's time I wouldn't normally have had, really.
This is the thing. I feel that the open secret across people I work with is that even though we say, oh, this is really convenient, we've got to work from home, a lot of people are saying, it really isn't that bad. It's actually a very nice sort of environment because, FOMO, fear of missing out. Oh, there's all these big events going on. I need to go out and do stuff to kind of prove that I'm living my best life. Yeah, and that's all gone now because there are no events. There's no pub. There's no restaurant. You can't, if you sit at home and you read a book, it's not like, oh, I could have gone out and meet a friend. No, you couldn't. You can't have done that. You literally couldn't have done much else. So there's, envy, jealousy. That's kind of like by the by at this point. It doesn't matter. And it's very kind of nice to kind of be in a situation like that, if I have to be brutally honest.
I've certainly found it a lot. We've been able to connect. I'm living with two guys, and we've been able to connect on a kind of different level, really. We had a little jam. We were out on the porch last night, and what's normally one of the busiest roads in Bristol, and there was almost no traffic going past. And about the point of that 8 o'clock round of applause for NHS workers, we were just
that was good.
We had I was sitting on my drum box, and then one of the other guys brought a guitar out, and then we had a harmonica. We just had like a little jam on the street.
Oh, you didn't play Wonderwall, did you?
No, we played They Look Back in Anger by the same artist.
Well, okay. All right.
Talking about solitude and stuff like that, we might be having more of that because we've upset the neighbours after the crisis.
So I do want to just relay my little funny story. So that they say one of the early signs you have COVID-19 is you lose your sense of smell and taste for a few days. So they say like if that just suddenly comes on, you should probably self-isolate just to be on the safe side. So I'd heard about this, and because I'm starting to cook now, I cooked myself a chicken korma. Got my rice, got some chicken, put the Patak's korma sauce on it, mate. I don't cook much, so for me to even just do that was an achievement. I made it, and I was like, oh, this is gonna be great. And when I was eating it, the chicken, I just couldn't taste it. I mean, I felt I could taste it. I got the texture, but that chicken flavour was just gone, and I was eating it, and I was just like, oh no, this only means one thing. Like, clearly, I've got COVID, and I was like panicking a little bit, mate. And then, anyway, I was making some rice pudding afterwards, and I put some cinnamon in, and I ate that, and I could taste it fine. And then it just dawned on me that I don't have COVID. Just my cooking is just abysmal, and I've just cooked some utterly just tasteless garbage, and so I just need to improve my cooking because that's the one thing I learned.
Yeah, it's also, I guess, we've got to look out for signs of diagnosing ourselves. If we're going mad, that could mean that we have COVID-19. It could mean that we have underlying mental health issues, or it could just mean that we've been self-isolating for a while, and things are going to be a bit different from now on.
Yeah, I mean, the government said we may be in this for 3 months, and maybe longer. So this is something with this situation isn't going to go away overnight. We're going to be like this at least for for at least for weeks minimum. So, take care of yourself. Really give yourself time to think. Work on that support network. Call your friends, call your family, talk to your loved ones. And you're not alone. This is a very weird time for all of us, but everyone in the world is in this together.
It is the case, isn't it? It's a weird one where we're isolating, but we're also, in a way, more connected than ever before, because we all it's like everyone's at war, but everyone in the planet's on the same side.
It's nice for once. On that note, I think we should draw this first podcast to a close. So it's goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me as well. And thanks very much for listening.
And I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.